Good evening and welcome. Tonight's the annual public meeting for the City of Marshall's SWPPP program. My name is Jesse Dean. I'm the Assistant City Engineer here. Tonight we're going to discuss some of the information on Marshall's stormwater permit and the actions that both the city and the public can take to continue our good practices here within the community and not only keep us compliant, but also help protect our local watersheds. But with that, I'd first like to talk about the MS4 program and some kind of general information regarding the permit itself. In 1972, Congress passed the Clean Water Act. With that, the EPA was also created, and throughout the years, they developed the NPDES Phase 2 program in 1999, which is now a federally mandated program. The City of Marshall is designated as a regulated small MS4, which stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or the NPDES, as we've talked about for a second here, the Phase 2 regulations. Within Minnesota, the MPCA requires that cities with a population over 5,000 people meet the requirements of the NPDES permit program. Through completed studies, testing, and other things, the MPCA reviews different waters like lakes and rivers, for example, for impairments. And in our area, we have the Redwood, the Cottonwood, and the Minnesota rivers, and all of those are listed as impaired waters, as well as some other the creeks, streams, and ditches in our area. When waters are listed as impaired, the pollutant limits are established for our area for the permitted MS4s that contribute water to those impaired waters. And really the goal of the permit is to restore and then maintain the chemical, biological, and physical integrity of the waters of the state by good, effective management and treatment of urban stormwater runoff. MS4s such as Marshall, we develop a stormwater pollution prevention program, or a SWPPP, to accomplish those permit goals. The Minnesota Stormwater Manual, which recently updated just this last year, actually lists several different urban pollutant sources. I have a handful of them listed here. Sources like vehicular traffic, things like oils and lubricants, grease, lawn and garden care. Easy way to think of this is like grass clippings or raking leaves and things of that nature. You get fallout from air pollution, municipal maintenance activities like salting during the winter season. So every time that you see snow plow out on your streets, spreading salt on the roads, that is potential for an urban pollution source. Commercial and industrial activities, illicit discharges. So an example of those would be direct connections, sump pumps or roof drains right directly into the storm sewer system. And you can see these around springtime when everybody's got their sump pump hoses right out into the storm sewer system. Improper disposal of household hazardous wastes like paints, pet and wildlife fecal waste, litter, just general waste, construction activities, and we'll actually talk about some of the examples of those as well a little bit later on. Storm sewer and sanitary sewer overflows, and runoff from residential driveways and parking areas. But from here, I'd like to kind of talk about Marshall's permit and stormwater management program a little bit more specifically. Since 2007, the City of Marshall has been operating under its NPDES permit and SWPPP program. This last November, the city was reissued their latest, newest NPDES permit, which lasts for the next 5-year permit term. As mentioned before, MS4s are required to all develop, implement, and enforce a stormwater management program, or the SWPPP, that is designed to reduce discharge of pollutants to the maximum extent practicable. So one of the parts that Marshall's NPDES and permit and SWPPP program is the management of urban stormwater pollutants into its impaired waters nearby. For example, the city has 2 requirements for pollution reduction to achieve its compliance with its permit. One is to reduce phosphorus output by 30%, and that's going back a little ways. Phosphorus can contribute to algae blooms. Algae blooms ultimately deplete the dissolved oxygen in the water and actually transports downstream, which ends up leading to fish kills and other stresses for aquatic animal life. Obviously, most of our aquatic animal life requires oxygen within the water to be able to breathe and use it through their gills. So when you lose some of that dissolved oxygen, vice versa, the animals and the fish wildlife have a little bit more tough time surviving in those types of environments. The other requirement that the city actually has here is reducing suspended solids, things like soils and grass and leaves within the discharges out into the rivers under 154 pounds per acre per year. And I know it's just a kind of a number out there, but it does add up very quickly when you talk about a community of several thousand people like we have here, and everybody being a contributing part to that. So when you hear people that say you can't see the bottom of Lake X or Y River anymore, usually suspended solids are a contributing factor to that. So when water gets cloudy and brown from suspended solids, light can't penetrate very deeply into that water, which actually limits aquatic plant growth, and in turn, habitats for fish and other organisms kind of suffer. So ultimately, the goal of our city's SWPPP here is directed to specifically restore and then maintain, back to the original intent of the permit, maintain those chemical, biological, and physical integrities of the Redwood, Cottonwood, and Minnesota rivers, as well as all the local creeks, streams, any other waters that our communities share. The city's going to continue to implement, review, and revise as if we need to, its SWPPP to make sure that we meet the requirements of the NPDES permit. So part of the city's SWPPP includes several best management practice, or BMPs. I'll refer back to it a handful of times more in this presentation, that we as a city implement to meet some specific requirements of the permit. So each BMP helps enhance aquatic and wildlife habitats in a certain way, and each BMP is crafted to do so and target a certain type of pollutant or an activity. They also contribute to improving the urban environment that ultimately all of us as the citizens of Marshall benefit because of an improved quality of life. With that, I do want to talk a little bit about the history of best management practices within the city, and then I'll talk a little bit more about what we do currently. So first, before the city was a regulated MS4 and under its NPDES permit, back in the 1990s, the city developed a surface water management planning process that would integrate what was traditional planning for adequate infrastructure, and then find a way to bring in water quality components and kind of marry the two. So that way, as we were continuing to build and develop and rebuild and rehabilitate, we were also considering pieces of water quality infrastructure and how can we make sure that they're both talking to each other and working in harmony. This process also led to the development of many of the city ordinances that address stormwater management issues within the city of Marshall. So today, under the current NPDES permit requirements, the city's implemented several more different types of BMPs to help manage stormwater related issues within the city. One of the main avenues the city does to work towards those permit goals is educating the public, very similar to this annual meeting, as well as any other different types of mediums that we use to help educate public. So with this, we do informational flyers, newsletters, public outreach programs. Public participation is ultimately really vital to our success, because we need participation in both education, programs such as the citywide cleanup. If we don't have participation in that, the program isn't very effective. We have an illicit discharge detection and elimination. That those are all different things that our public can help participate with and help us out when we're talking about not only compliance with the permit, but helping improve our quality of life and our environment. The city also works with different parties such as things like developers, contractors, homeowners, when we talk about construction site management for stormwater control and quality. The city promotes different types of programs for post-construction stormwater management, and we do this in both new construction as well as redevelopment areas. So anytime that we have construction in an area, we look at different types of post-construction BMPs that we can encourage and help develop. We also look internally at our own operations and try to find ways to reduce our reduce or prevent pollution and help promote good housekeeping practices. So referring back to those talking about salting in the wintertime, so things how much salt that we spread in our streets, we want to make sure that we have enough salt down that it assists with the melting, but not too much that the excess salt ends up going into our storm sewer system. This salt storage facility over at our street department shop, protecting that storage and making sure that that doesn't end up getting exposed to the weather and melting and potentially running off into the storm system as well. If you go to our city's website, if you go under public works, you'll find an entire page dedicated to stormwater here in Marshall. There we talk about our watersheds, the MS4 program, and soon the recording of this annual meeting and other stormwater information is going to be available there as well. If you drive around our city, you'll notice many different wet and dry ponds that we've constructed. Many of these are actually operated and maintained by the city Public Works Department. And this is to assist with treatment of stormwater before it ends up discharging out into the rivers and creeks and ditches and other waters nearby. Many of our private businesses and industries also contribute with stormwater management of their own, sometimes it's stormwater ponds and sometimes it's other different mediums, but they are also participating in this program as well. Those kinds of ponds, as well as any other types of treatments, are some of the physical infrastructure that the city has to help with our stormwater management here within the MS4. Regularly, public works staff here, we review and evaluate our Marshall's SWPPP here to ensure that we're compliant with not only the latest requirements of the NPDES, but we go through all the BMPs and we review them all, revise them. Sometimes we add new BMPs just to make sure that both the SWPPP and BMPs included within are relevant to the conditions today as well as they are effective. And it's important that they're both. The city also needs our citizens to help with our SWPPP. We want our people to be educated in stormwater issues within our city and provide some great feedback on how we can improve and be more effective. Residences, business developers, industries, any other interested parties, we really do welcome and ask people to submit comments and input on our SWPPP regularly. We do have several different types of mediums to help collect those comments. Sometimes it's by email. We have a Public Works email, or it's by phone. We have obviously a phone that you can get in touch with the Public Works Department. We also try at these annual meetings to try and collect comments as well. It's another great opportunity for us to be able to get comments and input on our SWPPP program as well as the MS4 permit. One of the main mechanisms of the permit is regulatory requirements and things like ordinances, city codes, laws in town. So we as the city regularly review the current ordinances that address erosion and sediment control, as well as any stormwater management. If the existing ordinances are deficient to address the needs of the current program and permit, we make amendments to those existing ordinances or we adopt new ordinances. And those are typical routes that we use to address any of those deficiencies that we might find. For example, the city in December of 2011, we passed an ordinance that addressed illicit discharges in connections within the city of Marshall. To go a little bit deeper into that, that ordinance aims to control the introduction of pollutants into our storm sewer system, which brought the city into compliance with the NPDES permit that was issued back in 2013. So we introduced that new ordinance to make sure that we are continuing to be not only compliant with the permit, but help reduce and eliminate some of those illicit discharges and connections to the city's storm sewer system. Some of the objectives of that ordinance include regulating the contribution of pollutants to the MS4 by stormwater discharges, prohibiting those illicit connections and discharges to the storm sewer system, as well as establishing the legal authority to be able to inspect, monitor, and enforce to ensure that we have compliance across town. Really with that, we spent a lot of time talking about permits and programs and plans and ordinances, and ultimately what a lot of people, especially the ones that are viewing this video now or looking at this presentation, are how does this affect me in my daily life? And with that, there's a couple different types of groups in here that we kind of direct these types of things to, and one of them is for property owners. And there are a lot of different actions that anyone can help take the city to help protect our nearby water resources and habitats, incorporating BMPs into landscaping and other land disturbing activities. You can think of rain barrels or rain gardens are a really great way to put a BMP into your landscaping to help stormwater management and treatment. Preventing illicit discharges into the stormwater system or nearby ponds and rivers. If you see illicit discharges, for example, somebody dumping a bin of grass right into the riverbank, or directly deconnecting their sump pump into the storm sewer system. Those are things that we would love for you to be able to tell us, so that way we can address those with the people that are creating those illicit discharges, and so we can kind of prevent them and educate people on why it's detrimental to our environment. Another piece for people to do is just don't do it yourself. Don't yourself dump grass clippings or leaves or debris right into the stormwater system or other different types of waters like rivers or stormwater ponds. The city does operate a compost site over on North 7th Street. This is for City of Marshall residents that gives them an opportunity to be able to dispose of those materials properly. We don't want you to blow grass clippings out into the street. Same thing when fall, when it comes to leaves and collecting leaves up. We don't want those in the streets and alleys as well. We would rather you adjust your mowing pattern to make sure that the blowing goes away from the street instead of towards the street, and bringing those leaves into the compost site like we talked about. Using a phosphorus-free lawn fertilizer is always a help for us. We do have an ordinance that limits using phosphorus and fertilizer, especially for new seed. But finding an alternative without phosphorus is always preferred for us, especially when it comes to stormwater and pollutants that might enter that stormwater. We also don't want to have people using fertilizers or any other landscaping chemicals within a certain amount of space within a drainage way or other types of waters. We usually want to keep some sort of a buffer between that, so that it prevents the potential for transport of those fertilizers and chemicals. Disposal of household hazardous waste properly. The Lyon County Household Hazardous Waste Facility is located right here in town at the Lyon County Public Works Building at the county fairgrounds right here in Marshall. Keeping trash cans and dumpsters covered to prevent litter from escaping and blowing away. It does get windy, so it happens pretty often. As mentioned, the city, we really can't do it alone, and we need everybody's help to be able to contribute to that. And if you want to know more about stormwater issues within the city of Marshall, take time to ask your public works staff. We're always available, and we love to share those different pieces with you, and not only just education on the stormwater issues in general, but how people can help contribute to the management of those stormwater discharges. The other group that we try to target is developers and contractors. And really, when it comes to what they can do to help us out, we really value a lot of self-governance when it comes to their construction sites. While we make the effort to try and ensure compliance with our permits and regulations, it's a lot easier for contractors to keep their sites compliant to begin with and prevent issues, rather than having to scramble to make corrections after they're certain to see soils washing down the street. Nobody's going to be going out on a rainy day to try and collect all of the soils that are washing down the gutter. It's a lot easier if they do that on a nice dry day before it becomes a problem. Some of the other things that contractors can do is use different BMPs to control erosion and sediments from washing out, and do inspections of their site for making sure that they're in compliance of the permit. Maintaining a log, possibly with photos as well. That's always very helpful. Developing an erosion and sediment control plan. You have in there an implementation schedule that says who's going to do what and when are they going to do it. Good housekeeping is really vital on those sites. A properly managed site means that waste and debris, keeping concrete washouts, garbage, all of that contained. Those are all different pieces of that good housekeeping that we like to see with our contractors and our developers at their sites. while a site is still under construction or dirt or soil is still exposed, contractors should be using temporary BMPs that keeps the site contained and prevented from washing down our gutters and our city streets into our storm system. Sometimes temporary BMPs include rock entrances that a rock entrance to a site will end up knocking soil off of tires as they come out before they end up tracking that soil out on the street. Erosion control blankets are another one, sediment basins, bile rolls, barriers, silt fence, silt curtains if you're in a waterway, inlet protection, and there's a myriad of other different temporary BMPs that people can use on their construction sites. Once a site is finished though, turf establishment like growing good hardy grass is always the first level of defense in controlling erosion and sediment. Depending on the site and the conditions, sometimes you need to add some additional permanent BMPs, and things like that are going to be riprap rock at an inlet and outlet for a pipe, check dams, sediment basins, ponds. You'll see those around town. Those are good examples of permanent stormwater BMPs that we see around the city. With that, I'd like to go through and look at some examples of poor practices within town. And site management is what we want to look at. So with this, we talked a little bit about earlier with blowing grass clippings out on the street. If you see here in the picture, these grass clippings are going to go right into the intake, which in turn will end up going right out into the river. And the same thing here. You can just as easily change the mowing pattern to keep the clippings from blowing out onto the street. Here's an example where we should be bringing the clippings to the compost site rather than just dumping them out into the riverbank, which will guaranteed get into the river the next windy day or the rainy day. Again, would rather see the leaves brought to the compost facility rather than dumped out on here on the riverbank. Different BMPs can prevent soils from getting off of construction sites and getting washed and tracked into our streets. You can see here in this photo a little bit of that soil tracking out into the street. Same thing here. This is probably a really good opportunity to see a rock entrance, knock off some of that soil before the soiled tires knock all that stuff out onto the street. Here you have the exposed soil pile right next to the curb without any type of control. It's not a surprise that you end up seeing the sediments getting washed right into the gutter here. Without any BMPs or controls here, all it takes is just a little bit of rain and you end up getting these piles of soil to start washing down into the driveways, and then it gets into the gutter and again following right into the storm system. This was not a lot of rain. I think this was like a 1-inch rain. So we're not talking about an immense amount of rain. Here, I think this might have been a 1/2 inch now I think about it. So it doesn't take a lot of rain to cause a big problem like this if you don't have those controls in place. And the same thing right here, at the dirt right in front of the gutter instead of in the boulevard or in the front yard where it probably belongs. I'm sure the landscaping company that was putting that topsoil up didn't mean for it to be in the gutter. But again, back to good housekeeping when you're doing that work is kind of clean up after yourself and make sure that everything's where it should be. And you might hear somebody ask, you know, is soil really going to end up in the gutter? Is it just going to drop out of that water? And maybe they doubt that it's even going to wash away. You can ensure them that it does get into the intake. So you can see it right here in this photo with the sediment right there in front of the catch basins. You get a rainy day and that water will carry those sediments and soils right to the storm system. Here's another example of just poor housekeeping. Really, you should be cleaning up the pallets when you're not using them or once you're done with them. Move the soil off the street. The street is just not a place for stockpiling of soils or really anything for that matter. Here's another photo of that same area. All the sediments exposed. You can potentially run all that sediment right, well, not all of it, but some of that sediment right into the storm photo or storm intake. Right down the block. I think it was a 1/2 block is where the next storm intake was. The same site. Glad they have a dumpster here, but and they're collecting all the debris and trash and keeping it contained. But does it really get windy here in Marshall? I guarantee you. I mean, every 50% of the days is going to be windy enough to blow most of that trash right out of that bin. All it takes is a lid that would help keeping this from flying out into the neighborhood. Here's an example of a concrete washout. MPCA really doesn't allow this for a concrete washout. These washouts end up in storm sewer systems, or it goes right into the soils here. Obviously, in this situation, if it doesn't get into the storm system, it's going to infiltrate right into the soil, and then you're never really going to get that material out of the soil without digging it out and replacing it, which can come at a pretty high cost. The proper way to contain these concrete washouts is a contained area with a liner. So you'll see them with 2x lumber and a nice poly liner that's connected and kept there to prevent washing out from, or the concrete washout from leaving that contained container. And once it's dried or hardened, you can just take that liner and dispose of it properly, rather than in this photo, it's not going to be contained. It's going to end up somewhere else where it shouldn't be. You look at this photo, and today the house looks really great and no problems. But if you looked at it a week ahead of that, you have all this soil tracking, and the dirt could have been in the street and washed into the storm system before anybody had even got out there to sweep it up and clean up after themselves. So again, good housekeeping of your construction sites can prevent stuff like this happening. It's great that at the end of the day, the street's cleaned up and you kind of cleaned up after yourselves, but we want to prevent issues like this where soils are ending up into the storm sewer system before it happens rather than after. I'd like to finish up the presentation with kind of talking about a few good BMP examples to kind of finish up on a good note. Here, if you look at this site, you got seeding, you got mulch, you got bio-roll around the site, so good containment, and very unlikely that you're going to have soil erosion here or sediment transport anywhere. Here in the city of Marshall, we do a lot of hydro seeding. You'll see it all over town. This ends up having to seed and mulch together, so it's another a good way to keep the soils from washing out and going down into the gutter or into the storm system. Another good hydro seeding example here. Here you can easily see that there's no exposed sediment that's going to end up in the gutter or again downstream into our storm system or into the rivers. Here is right next to the Redwood River. You can see the riverbank. Well, I guess you can't really see the riverbank, but you can see all the trees that are right there. This is keeping all that potential runoff from going out into the river. And the same thing here, you can see the river right there. Bio-roll here used at the top of those gabion baskets is keeping that sediment from transporting directly into the river. Here's a really good example of inlet protection, keeping sediment from washing right into the storm system directly through the intake. Here, if you look at the photo, you probably could use a little bit additional mulching towards the front of the picture, but what I'd like you to see is kind of look around the slopes around the pond. Really good seed and mulch around the pond slopes, and that's really what you want to see, especially when you're working around a pond where it's going to have stormwater treatment. You don't want to have a lot of sediment getting into there right away. In this kind of a situation here, you got a little bit of a channel. This was actually, if you look at it, this is Walmart's stormwater pond. It's a very long pond. But in situations like this, erosion control blankets can be used to help keep the site from having erosion or sediment runoff. So erosion control blankets are another really good option for a temporary BMP to keep the soil from washing out into the storm system. So ultimately, through everything that we do today, we're hoping that we're doing better than yesterday. And if we really think about it and think about what our continued improvements going to do for our community, as well as our watersheds and our habitats for tomorrow. And with that, I'd like to open it up and thank you all for attending tonight's meeting regarding our SWPPP as well as our MS4 permit program and learning about a few of the things that we all can do to help. Again, my name's Jesse. I'm the Assistant City Engineer here with the City of Marshall. The other good contact that if I can't be reached, you can connect up with our Director of Public Works. His name's Jason Anderson. You can always ask him questions about stormwater related issues. He's glad to share them as well. You can see the contact information here on the slide. Our phone's 507-537-6773. You can go to our website, ci.marshall.mn.us, go under Public Works. We have a stormwater page right there. Or you can get us that email, public.works@ci.marshall.mn.us. Send us an email and ask us questions or provide us comments or input. We'd be glad to take it. With that, I'd be glad to take any comments or questions regarding the presentation tonight, the program, any other stormwater related issues. If you see some opportunities for improvement, we'll be glad to take those as well. Again, thank you for your attendance tonight, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.